It was just another warm afternoon in suburban Georgia, the kind of day where nothing much seems to happen. The streets were calm, traffic was light, and Officer Darren Watts was cruising down Highway 18 in his squad car, sunglasses on, scanning his surroundings like a hawk. He wasn't responding to a call. He wasn't investigating a crime. He was doing what many officers call routine patrol, except Darren's idea of routine had a troubling pattern. Watts had been with the force for 5 years, but in that time, he'd already gained a reputation. Locals whispered that he had a type when it came to who he pulled over. Young black drivers, in nice cars especially, always seemed to draw his attention, even when there was no clear reason. Other officers noticed it too, but no one said anything. He was never violent, never loud, but his stops always seemed unnecessary, unjustified, and today would be no different. Or so he thought. As he drove past a four-way stop, a black BMW 7 Series pulled into view. The windows were tinted, the body polished to a mirror shine, and the driver, though barely visible, looked calm, confident, and well-dressed. Watts didn't see any traffic violations. No swerving, no speeding, no broken tail light. Just a nice car with a black man behind the wheel. That, to him, was suspicious enough. Without hesitation, he made a quick U-turn, followed the car for about 2 blocks, then flipped on his lights and hit the siren. The BMW pulled over smoothly to the side of the road. The driver didn't hesitate. No erratic movement. No sign of fear. He simply lowered the window and waited. Officer Watts approached the driver's side with his usual swagger, one hand resting near his holster, the other holding his flashlight, even though the sun was shining bright overhead. "License and registration," he said sharply, skipping the usual greeting. The driver didn't flinch. He reached into the glove compartment slowly, pulled out his registration, then handed over his license. Watts looked at the ID, expecting to see a local address. Maybe someone from Atlanta. Maybe someone with a prior record. But as he read the name and title, something in his brain paused like a glitch in a computer system. James A. Carter, Chief, Internal Affairs Division, Department of Justice. Watts blinked, looked again, then again. He straightened up. "I'm sorry, you're with the DOJ?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. Mr. Carter looked him straight in the eye. His tone was calm, controlled, but there was something behind his gaze, a quiet power that didn't need to shout. "Yes," he said. "I'm on official business. Headed to your precinct, actually." Officer Watts swallowed hard. For the first time, he looked unsure. His confidence began to crumble, but something inside him, ego perhaps, refused to back down. "You fit the description of a suspect we're trying to locate," Watts said, fumbling for authority. Carter tilted his head slightly, clearly unimpressed. "Oh, what description is that, officer?" he asked. Watts hesitated. His mouth opened, closed. He had nothing. No bolo, be on the lookout, alert. No radio call. No description ever mentioned. Just a man in a nice car that didn't look right to him. The silence between them was louder than the siren that had brought them there. And in that moment, Officer Watts realized something. This wasn't going to be just another traffic stop. This was the beginning of a moment that would define both of their careers, but only one of them was ready for it. Officer Darren Watts stood frozen beside the BMW, gripping the license of James A. Carter, Chief of Internal Affairs at the Department of Justice. His brain scrambled to find a way out, but his pride? That was still in full control. He just pulled over the one man who could legally dismantle his career. But instead of admitting the mistake and apologizing, Officer Watts doubled down. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," he said, words tumbling from his mouth like bricks. "I'm just following protocol." Carter didn't move. He just stared at the officer calmly, like a teacher waiting for a student to realize they'd failed the assignment. "Oh," Carter replied, voice calm as ever. "And what's that description?" Watts cleared his throat. "Black male, mid-40s, driving a dark vehicle." That wasn't a description. That was an excuse. Carter glanced toward the dashcam mounted on Watts' patrol car. It was recording everything. And now so was his own phone, which he had quietly placed on the center console, camera facing forward. It was already capturing the officer's voice, his shaky demeanor, and the weak attempt to justify a baseless stop. "You and I both know," Carter said slowly, "that's not a legal reason to initiate a traffic stop. There's no report, no warrant, no probable cause. You never even asked if I knew why I was being pulled over, because you knew I didn't do anything wrong." Watts opened his mouth, but said nothing. Carter continued, voice low but commanding. "What you just did is called a pretextual stop. And under the Fourth Amendment, it's illegal. You know that, right?" Watts shifted uncomfortably. He glanced around as if hoping someone else might appear and bail him out. But he was alone. Just him, a camera, and a man who could file a federal investigation with a single phone call. "I was just being cautious," Watts stammered. "Can't be too careful these days." Carter's eyes narrowed, but he didn't raise his voice. "Cautious? Let me guess, because I'm black in a suit driving a car that you think I shouldn't afford? That made me a threat." Watts swallowed hard. He was outmatched, and he knew it. But pride? Pride could be a dangerous thing. Rather than walk away, he made it worse. "I don't care what your badge says," Watts snapped. "Out here, I enforce the law. Doesn't matter who you are." Carter slowly turned his head toward the officer. His tone dropped, colder now, controlled but sharp. "That's exactly the problem." Silence filled the air again. Tense. Electric. At that moment, 2 more squad cars pulled up behind the BMW. Watts had called for backup before realizing who he was dealing with, trying to paint Carter as a non-compliant suspect. 2 officers stepped out, hands on their belts, ready to de-escalate or assist, but stopped cold when they saw who was in the driver's seat. One of them recognized Carter instantly. "Sir," he said with a nod, eyes wide. Watts' face turned pale. The others knew, and now, he knew, this was far bigger than a routine stop. Mr. Carter looked back toward Watts. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked quietly. Watts didn't answer. He didn't have to. The damage was already done. Because the moment Officer Watts decided to use race as a reason, the moment he abused the badge he wore, he didn't just stop a man. He stopped internal affairs. And internal affairs was going to respond. By now, the air around that roadside scene was thick with tension. The second and third officers who had arrived didn't know whether to salute or step back. One of them had already recognized Chief James A. Carter, but Officer Watts still stood there, too deep in his own mess to realize the full scope of what he'd done. Chief Carter slowly turned off the engine, reached into the console, and retrieved a slim black case. He opened it and calmly removed his badge, gold, polished, and official. He held it out just enough for all 3 officers to see. Federal DOJ, Internal Affairs Division. One of the backup officers took an instinctive step back. His hand, which had been resting near his holster, dropped instantly to his side. Chief Carter spoke firmly, but without raising his voice. "Gentlemen, I advise you to stop this traffic stop immediately and return to your vehicles. I am not only on federal duty, I am also in your system as a visiting authority scheduled to meet your precinct commander in," he checked his watch, 22 minutes. The officer who had first recognized him nodded quickly. "Yes, sir," he said, immediately backing away. "But Officer Watts?" He hesitated. He looked between Carter and his fellow officers, trying to process what was happening. He was still clinging to his authority, like a man holding onto a sinking ship. "This is a misunderstanding," he muttered. "We're just being cautious." Carter looked at him squarely. "No, Officer Watts, this is not a misunderstanding. This is systemic behavior. This is racial profiling. And this, right here, is why Internal Affairs exists." Watts didn't respond. Chief Carter picked up his phone, which was still recording, and with a few swipes, saved the video and uploaded it to a secure DOJ database. Backup or no backup, this incident was now on record. "You do realize I've been collecting data on your department for 3 months?" Carter said. "Anonymous complaints, civilian reports, even comments from officers inside the building who are afraid to speak up." Watts blinked. "Wait, you were investigating us?" Carter gave a slow nod. "You just made my job easier." Everything had changed in a matter of minutes. The officer who once held the power was now standing face-to-face with a man investigating his entire department, and he'd just handed that man evidence on a silver platter. "Effective immediately," Carter said to the backup officers, This officer is to be relieved of patrol duty until further notice. His body cam footage, dash cam footage, and this video, he held up his phone, are to be submitted directly to my office. I expect full cooperation from your precinct leadership, which I'll be discussing in today's meeting. The officers nodded. Watts stood frozen, unable to move. It was over. This wasn't just a warning. This was consequences. Real ones. As Carter drove off, leaving behind flashing lights and stunned officers, Watts stood on the side of the road, silent, powerless, and exposed. He hadn't just stopped a black man that day. He had stopped the one man who could hold him, and every cop like him, accountable. And Carter? He wasn't angry. He wasn't emotional. He was ready, because that roadside stop was no longer about ego or pride. It was about justice, and justice had just taken the wheel. By the time Chief James A. Carter walked into the precinct that afternoon, the walls were buzzing. Phones were ringing, whispers were flying, and officers who had once sat confidently behind their desks were now sitting a little straighter and sweating a little more. Word had traveled fast. The man Officer Watts had pulled over, he wasn't just internal affairs. He was the head of the very division sent to investigate the department. And now, with undeniable video evidence in hand, Carter wasn't walking in for a routine review. He was walking in with ammunition, and no one in that building was ready for the storm that was coming. As Carter entered the lobby, the precinct captain, a seasoned officer named Captain Reynolds, was already waiting at the front desk, straightening his collar and forcing a nervous smile. "Chief Carter, welcome," he said quickly, hand extended. "We weren't expecting." Carter shook the captain's hand, but didn't smile back. "I know. That was the point." They walked into the conference room, where several department heads had already been gathered. Carter placed his phone on the table, turned it toward them, and pressed play. For the next 4 minutes, the room watched the footage. Officer Watts' aggressive tone, the weak excuse for pulling Carter over, the awkward silence when Carter revealed his identity, the backup officers arriving, the badge, the power shift. No one said a word. When the video ended, Carter folded his hands calmly. "This stop," he began, "isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern, a symptom of a larger disease inside your department. And I'm here to treat it." Captain Reynolds tried to defend the force. "We take allegations seriously, sir, and Officer Watts' actions do not represent our department as a whole." But Carter cut him off. 18 complaints, he said. 18 separate civilian reports naming Officer Watts for racially biased stops, and not a single disciplinary action. "Why is that, Captain?" The room fell silent again. Carter leaned in. "This isn't about one bad cop. It's about a system that protects him. That looks the other way. That tells the community, your voice doesn't matter here." The tension in the room was thick. Some officers looked down at their hands. Others avoided eye contact altogether. They knew he was right. Carter reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "This," he said, "is the preliminary report on your department. It includes community complaints, response data, stop-and-search statistics, and internal interviews, all showing a clear pattern of racial profiling, lack of accountability, and abuse of power." He slid the file across the table. "And now, thanks to this morning, I've got first-hand evidence." That same day, Officer Watts was placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. His body cam and dash cam footage were collected and sealed. Carter also ordered a full department audit, including past complaint reviews, hiring practices, and diversity training procedures. It didn't stop there. Chief Carter scheduled interviews with community leaders, civil rights attorneys, and even residents who had filed complaint in the past, but were never heard. Within 48 hours, his investigation had expanded into every layer of the department's culture. The media caught wind fast. A DOJ official being racially profiled during an active investigation? It was all over the evening news. Headlines read, "Justice pulls justice. Internal Affairs Chief racially profiled by officer under his own investigation." Public reaction was swift. Civil rights groups praised Carter's poise and power. Activists used the incident to push for national police reform. Even some officers within the department, ones too afraid to speak up before, started coming forward. In just 72 hours, The entire department had been flipped on its head. And Officer Watts? He had no defense, no way to spin the truth. He had brought down the very force that once protected him, not with a gun or violence, but with his own arrogance and the assumption that no one would hold him accountable. But this time someone did, and the wheels of justice were now turning fast. Weeks had passed since the day Officer Darren Watts made the biggest mistake of his career, pulling over a man for the color of his skin, only to discover that man was Chief James A. Carter, head of internal affairs for the Department of Justice. But for the town, the police department, and everyone who had quietly suffered for years, that traffic stop was the turning point. As the investigation unfolded, the truth came pouring out like water from a cracked dam. Records showed that Officer Watts had faced 18 complaints for racially motivated behavior. Each one had either been dismissed due to lack of evidence, or swept under the rug by superiors who didn't want to deal with the paperwork. But now, with video evidence, witness accounts, and a federal officer as the victim, there was nowhere left to hide. Watts faces justice. Within 3 weeks, Officer Watts was fired from the department. But it didn't stop there. Chief Carter pushed for a review of the state's law enforcement certification board, and as a result, Watts' badge was permanently revoked. He could no longer serve in law enforcement in any state. Not as a cop, not as a security guard, not even as a school resource officer. Some called it harsh. Others called it justice. But Carter knew better. This isn't punishment, he said at a press conference. This is accountability. This is what happens when you let bias live inside a badge. Department reshaped. The fallout didn't stop with one officer. Chief Carter's investigation uncovered a culture of complacency in the department. Supervisors who ignored complaints were either demoted or placed under review. Several officers chose to resign quietly rather than face disciplinary hearings. The department was placed under a federal monitoring program for 1 year, which included mandatory anti-bias training, body camera upgrades, and monthly community review board meetings, where everyday citizens could speak directly with officers and hold them accountable. Recruitment practices were changed. Carter insisted the department partner with colleges and civil service programs to bring in a more diverse, better-trained group of officers. And most importantly, the town, which had felt silence for so long, was finally being heard. A community reclaimed. For many local black residents, the traffic stop had become a symbol, not of fear, but of hope. Hope that the system, while deeply flawed, could be changed from the inside. Parents spoke up at school board meetings. Teenagers began organizing local town halls. People who had once stayed silent about their experiences with racial profiling were now telling their stories. On camera, on social media, and in the streets. One young man, 19 years old, who had been stopped by Officer Watts just 3 months before Carter's visit, said, "He pulled me over 'cause I had music playing. Said my car was too nice for someone my age. I told people, but no one cared. Now, they care. Now they listen." Chief Carter didn't just bring justice that day. He ignited a movement in that town. Carter's final words. In a public address a month after the incident, Carter stood at a podium outside the precinct, the same building he'd walked into quietly weeks before. This time the press was there. Officers stood at attention. Community members packed the sidewalk, listening in silence. Carter looked out over the crowd and said, "The badge is a symbol. It can protect or it can harm. But what it should never do is silence." Too often, those sworn to uphold the law forget the most basic one. Equal protection for all. What happened to me was not unique. It happens every day to people with no badge, no camera, no title. The only difference this time is that I had the power to fight back. He paused, letting that sink in. But real justice isn't about catching one bad officer. It's about changing the culture that allows them to exist. This town is now a case study in reform. Not because it was perfect, but because it was willing to change. Applause broke out. Some people cheered. Others simply nodded, tears in their eyes. For once, the community felt like someone was on their side. The bigger picture. The story didn't just stay local. National outlets picked it up. Activists shared it as a call to action. Law schools used the case as a real-world example of constitutional violations. Even other police departments reached out to Chief Carter for advice on implementing similar reforms. A traffic stop had turned into a wake-up call. And Officer Watts, the man who once felt untouchable behind the wheel of his cruiser, he had become the example of what happens when power is abused and when the right person gets pulled over. Conclusion. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption, responsibility, reform, and most importantly, it was about reminding the world that you never know who you're stopping or who might finally stop you.